Hi, my name is Mike Bibby. I'm currently working on some electronic music production for the band Radiant Devices. We at Radiant Devices are currently working on a cover of Declare Independence by Bjork. So I thought I'd kind of walk you guys through my process, and if you've been recording for a little bit or just getting into these sorts of things, I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions on things that you can do to kind of tweak the sounds of the synthesizers or drum machines or any of the recordings that you're doing. A lot of the times, especially with electronic music, but with music in general, sometimes synthesizers, sometimes drum machines can sound a little bit too present or a little bit too sterile, and adding a little bit of grit to that or adding a little bit of color to that can be a really interesting thing. And one of my favorite ways to do that is to run, especially a digital instrument, into a guitar amplifier, or pretty much any amplifier for that matter. As soon as you are running into a different amplifier, the amplifier itself is going to color the sound a little bit, the speaker is going to change the sound, the microphone is going to change the sound, and most of those things are generally going to sound very musical and very interesting. So I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of my process here and give you a couple of points, suggestions, pitfalls to avoid if you do want to try this sort of a thing yourself. So what I'm doing right now is I have a Moog Modular virtual instrument. I sold all of my hardware synthesizers a while ago, which is a little bit sad, but necessary for the sake of space. What I'm doing right now is I'm running my Moog Modular out through, I have a Fire Studio project, right? And I'm running one of the outputs on this that would normally be going to a speaker into a reamper, then into my guitar amp. Once it's going out of the guitar amp, I have a microphone up to the amp cabinet, and then I have that microphone wired right back to the PreSonus, which is running then back into my DAW, my DAW, Digital Audio Workstation. So just for a quick demo of that, here is my original synthesizer sound. Which sounds kind of like that. I'm then going to distort it a little bit. I distort it a little bit more. And then I'm going to tweak the filters a little bit. So that's my current setup, which is a little bit elaborate, and to be completely frank, a little bit more than I even needed. When I first started doing this, I assumed that you couldn't just run something that was a normal headphone output into a guitar amp and have it sound decent, but a little bit of experimenting since that has proven me completely wrong. Running a normal headphone output into a guitar amp actually sounds surprisingly good the majority of the time. Every once in a while, you will get a little bit of ground hum depending on exactly how that system is wired, which is what the reamper will help with. Your tone will be a little bit different, but usually it's more than close enough for rock and roll, and a little bit of tweaking often will actually make it sound even better. And then if you do still have noise problems after that, I suggest a noise gate. When I first started doing this, I also made the other common mistake of creating a synthesizer sound or creating a drum machine sound or whatever I wanted, tweaking that sound until I was happy with that, and then applying a distortion to that. And after a lot of experimenting, I've realized, especially with distortions, they're largely going to make your loud parts sound quieter and your quiet parts sound louder, which is not always necessarily the best thing. So what I've been doing with this is I've been having the synthesizer running, I've been running it into the guitar amp, and then as I'm listening it, then I'm readjusting my filters, I'm readjusting my envelopes on the synthesizer itself so that sound better matches the actual sound that I'm doing. Like I said though, my setup is a little bit elaborate. I've been doing this for a while, but it really doesn't necessarily need to be this elaborate, especially for this. This is just kind of my normal workflow, which I have set up to, have a few extra options. But you can do this with a phone. You can run your phone out into an amplifier. You do need to be a little bit careful with this. Normally a headphone output, what a lot of people call a line level signal, is not going to quite be the same as an instrument level signal, the sort of signal that would be coming out of your guitar or bass. So you might need to be a little bit careful with volume on that. But you can run it directly out of a phone. You can run it directly out of another interface like this. And most of those generally sound surprisingly good. Like I said, sometimes because those signals are a little bit different, you need to be careful not to, do anything crazy loud. It is technically possible, although quite unlikely, to do anything that damages the equipment. The most dangerous thing would be any sort of a feedback loop. Now, a feedback loop would happen is if I was running sound out of this. One of the things that I often like to do is take my headphone output, plug it in there, run that headphone output into a distortion pedal input, and then run the distortion pedal output back into the device input, which usually looks something like that, and then you can tweak your distortion pedal to your heart's content there. Some recording software, if it is sending a signal out the headphone, and then into the distortion, and the distortion back into the input, your recording software may take the sound that is coming into this input, and just so you can hear what you're doing, it may send it to the headphones, right? Which would be great if it was going to a pair of headphones, but right now it is not. So if the sound actually goes into this input and your recording software says, oh, let me be helpful to you and let you listen to what you're doing and send that sound back to your headphones, it will then send the sound back into the distortion pedal, which will send the exact same sound back into the recording device, which will then send the exact same sound back into the distortion pedal, and it will create probably a horribly loud, annoying, high-pitched feedback loop that you probably really, really, really don't want to hear. So that is one of the dangers of a more complicated wiring or more unusual wiring with a device like this. So be a little bit careful of things like monitoring, or what some software will call an echo, where you're actually hearing what you're doing as you're doing it, because if it thinks it's being helpful in giving that sound to your headphones, and that sound, the headphone output isn't wired to the headphones, that may not be helpful. All right, so you can turn that monitoring off. You can adjust the levels on that. Usually software is going to have a do not echo or disable monitor option somewhere on there. But the short version of that story is just be careful with volume. There's a volume knob on things. You'd be a little bit careful, a little bit gradual with that for a reason. But you can even do this literally directly on your phone. You want to step down for me just for a second? So like I said, I have this big elaborate setup. You can play all kinds of games with different pedals. I got this guy going here, I got this guy going here. But rather than going out of this reamper, right, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take this out of the circuit, and I'm literally going to take my phone, and I have a jack there that goes into there, this thing, and then running this drum loop, which sounds something like this. Into here. I think sounds cool. But yeah, experiment with this. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily need to be high-end gear. Just be a little bit careful, a little bit thoughtful, kind of tweak and adjust as you go along. And then a lot of the times, even for a beginner up to an intermediate home recording type person, you can get some really, really interesting gritty sounds out of guitar effects, pedals. And the only reason that I say guitar is just because a lot of times guitar effects are very, very, very cheap and readily available. Not always the best tool for the job, but sometimes if you want something to sound purposefully gritty or messed up, sometimes the best tool isn't the best tool. Anyway, like I said, a lot of this stuff is good enough for rock and roll and is very, very worth experimenting with. And sometimes it takes a little bit of tweaking, but I'll show you some of my mixes, and then you can take this advice for whatever it's worth. So, thanks for watching. Again, my name is Mike Bibby. If you're interested, I will put links to Radiant devices. They are opening for Psychic TV coming up soon, and there'll be links to all that. Thanks. Have a good one.